Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. It's sometimes easy to think that we have a working knowledge of all the things that inhabit our planet, that all of the territory is mapped, that all of the plants have been discovered and cataloged, that all of the creatures have been broken down into their taxonomic ranks. But many people have had encounters with creatures that seem to exist outside of these parameters. Creatures who may even cross over from different dimensions, or who are able to change their form or density. The definition of a cryptid is an animal that is presumed to exist on the basis of anecdotal or other evidence considered insufficient by mainstream science. As we know, mainstream science is subject to all sorts of bias, and is often funded by corporations or institutions that have a vested narrative to conform to. One of the things that this show sets out to do is to re-imbue first-hand experience with the importance it deserves in the greater conversation. With the ever-increasing rise of scientism, people seem more than happy to relinquish direct experience or research to the domain of the proclaimed experts. All the seeking or questioning we need do is readily served to us directly from our scientific institute of choice, exhibiting a form of passivity formerly reserved for the devoutly religious. So, it's people like today's guest, Lon Strickler, who actually goes out into the field and investigates the sorts of things that mixed science refuses to give the time of day to, who are the real pioneers. Lon has written several books about his experiences with these creatures and the dozens of people who have witnessed them. His blog, Phantoms and Monsters, has been going strong for the last 14 years, and he continues to investigate and document the entities that otherwise might fall through the cracks of our thinly woven consensus reality. I start the interview off by asking if something in Lon's childhood might have spurred him on to investigate the paranormal.
I knew I was an intuitive, even though I didn't really understand it, when I was around 8 years old. I lived, and now do live again, near Gettysburg. And I used to spend a lot of time on the battlefield in the summertime when I was a kid. So what happened was one day I was in the area, what they call Death Valley, which is between Devil's Den and Round Top. And suddenly I just started experiencing all kinds of sense, hearing, sight, smell. I mean, it was everything. I was hearing drums, cannon fire, gunfire, screaming. I could actually smell gunpowder, smell blood.
Wow.
It was that vivid. I don't know what sparked it. I had been on the battlefield before, though I don't know is when that particular day kind of matched or mimicked one of the particular days of the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
If it was in that area, it had to have been the second day of the battle. So, it was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did it take you by surprise?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I had known that I was able to sense strange things, I guess strange energies when I was younger, but as time went by, I started picking up more and more. And it's not like I lived in a haunted house or anything. It's just something that I can sense spirit energy. I can't communicate with spirits. But I can sense when they are trying to communicate. I occasionally will be in touch and feel emotions like an empath would somewhat with a spirit. But that's the extent of it. Quite honestly, as I grew older, when I was getting out of high school, I actually moved down to Maryland. And I lived in Maryland up until about 3 years ago. And I moved back. But as time went on, and I started getting involved with some other aspects of the paranormal. I had an experience in '81 where I had an encounter with a Bigfoot-like creature in Maryland. And in '88, I had an encounter with what I believed to have been something. It was a winged humanoid of some type. But that was here in Pennsylvania. So, I mean, I have experienced several things. And I used to keep a lot of notes when I was younger. This was kind of before computers. And I used to keep a lot of written notes and audio tapes. So, around 1998 or so, I started writing for a paranormal website. And the guy that had the website said, you ought to just start a blog. I milled it over for years and years. And eventually back in 2005, I started Phantoms and Monsters. And I guess that's kind of where it really blossomed. I mean, I started doing more investigations. My abilities started to increase. I learned how to remote view. I received training from an actual remote viewer. And it kind of expanded on my my abilities.
Do you ever use the remote viewing in your investigations?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. How does that come into? I don't know a whole lot about remote viewing. Can you summarize?
It just depends on the situation. I use what you would call scientific or controlled remote viewing. And basically, it's done in steps, and you do take the sensory, non-conscious signals or evidence that comes to your mind, but eventually as you work through it, and in real remote viewing, it doesn't really supposed to be a psychic endeavor, but in my case it always does become a psychic endeavor. And when I used to be involved with this one individual who taught me how to do this, they would actually run the session and I would do the actual remote view. And as we went through, she controlled how I would go into each area of the view, and if she needed to pull me out, she would. And there had been instances where I have had physical attacks, psychic physical attacks, and it's hard for people to believe, but just for instance, I did a case up in Prince Edward Island. I was in Maryland, she was in Wales, and I experienced a psychic attack from electronic wise, if you can say that. But I had bruised ribs.
Wow.
And I had lacerations from my sternum down to my navel. So and she did pull me out quick enough to get me out of there. But that does occasionally happen.
So when you remote view, does a part of you or your consciousness actually travel to the place?
It's a non-conscious endeavor. It's basically like and it's really hard to describe. And I think everybody that does it is different. I can distinguish spiritual energy by colors, which is kind of bizarre. I know a few people that have been able to do that. I know a few very well-known remote viewers that have the same thing. Of course, the colors are different. I mean, when I start, the colors I see are a pink and like a foam sea green color.
Interesting.
That is what I sense. And that's when I know there's spirit energy within, the area I am viewing.
At least they're pretty colors.
Well, I guess so.
I
probably prefer other ones, but that would, that seems to be what comes up for me.
Interesting. So then you started the blog, and then how did it come that people started finding you out?
Well, I started putting some of my stories on there, some of the, some current paranormal stories, and I started adding some of my experiences, some things I have investigated over years. And, it's one of those, I kept at it. I was doing this daily, and I still do it 5 days a week plus once on a weekend. So, it picked up quite a subscribership. I'd say right now I have about 30,000 daily subscribers to the newsletter. And, this is all free as well. And, that includes people that come onto the blog or do the art that use the feed, that get the information off the feed. But it's been fairly steady, and it's allowed me to be able to have access to a lot of different encounters and accounts. I built up a trust to where people can refer me and do refer me to others who have problems. And I am constantly helping people, with situations, with spiritual situations and other things. There's a lot out there. It really is. And it's just, people kind of refer me to the TV show Supernatural. Well, it's nothing like it. I'm not there killing anything. But it's, I do spirit rescue. I do help people cope with some of what they're dealing with. I have been involved with cases that involved Creole religion or voodoo, Santeria, Obeah, and others. And I've been involved with that. I've done a lot of different things, a lot of Southern conjuring, what you consider root conjuring, Appalachian folk medicine. I was kind of raised in a family that believed in powwowing, which is a folk medicine that's associated with the Pennsylvania Dutch. And I learned a little of that, got interested, was never really formally trained. So I'm not a practitioner, but I'm quite aware of it and can recognize it when I see it.
What you said spirit rescue, what is that?
That's basically going into a situation where there is an earthbound entity within a home or a residence or workplace that's causing issues. And it's a matter of investigating it, trying to figure out what exactly is going on. I use remote view to make a connection, to get a story behind why the spirit has remained on this earth plane. And then I start working using what people would call the angels or the guides to come forth and to help remove this spirit, this entity, energy, I like to call it, to the next level.
And you have a lot of success with that.
I have done quite a few.
Fantastic. They're probably relieved to be released too, I would imagine, the spirits.
In some cases, they're a little difficult. All spirits have free will. So if you come across a situation where an earthbound refuses to leave, it's pretty hard to convince them to do it. I'm not there to force anything.
Sure. Is it often, I'm sure it's a mixture of lots of different things, but is it often because maybe they're holding on to something that they don't want to let go of, or do they usually have motivations for staying around, or are they just not aware that they're bound?
Well, it runs the gamut.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of them do not realize they're even dead. If they died quickly, like they were killed somewhat like in an accident or murder or such.
Sure.
Some of those that are earthbound seem to think that they need to close, relationships or to keep their eye on someone who they loved, or they just feel that they have to stay on.
Sure. And I'm sure there's situations where maybe spirits hang around to maybe they're malevolent and you kind of have to order them out, right?
Well, the earthbounds that are malevolent for the most part were evil or had real issues when they were alive. And in those cases, many times there's an oppression where they actually attach to a living person. So that tends to be a problem occasionally. Possession is really rare. And, you hear about possession a lot, about demons and such. Well, I don't particularly believe in the demons in a religious
Sure.
I guess, a religious sense. Evil is evil as far as I'm concerned. And if it's malevolent and it's causing issues, I will try to alleviate that. But it normally takes a good deal of time to take care of that. And of course, you have to have complete cooperation with the person who's actually the victim.
Yeah, yeah, sure. And are they usually people that they had issues with when they were alive?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Okay.
A lot of time it has to do with people who are in a dysfunctional situation at home, ill. A lot of the young are influenced in an oppression. It's very rare when it's something from, it's an actual oppression or actual possession from the energy of a departed friend or family.
Have you had a lot of experience with poltergeists?
Yeah, poltergeists are usually a thought form. In other words, it's usually 99% of the time, it's a self-manifested entity. In other words, if there's a situation where, and a lot of times it has to do with a teenager or child who manifest one of these entities through their mind. The mind's a strange thing. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot that we really do not about the human mind, but it can get to the level where it can pick up energy from an outside entity, or it can feed upon dysfunction or other energy in the surrounding, in the area where it actually haunts.
Hmm.
Most poltergeists stay in one location. There have been occasions when I have seen them attach themselves and move about, but most likely they are usually in one location.
And their thought forms typically created by like an adolescent or a teenager. And do they ever sort of I don't know the proper terminology, but sort of become like autonomous beings in and of themselves?
Yeah, they're almost like a twin sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I have actually sensed these things following the person around during, if they're at home, sometimes when they're out. The person is usually not aware of it. Now, there have been occasions where it was done on purpose. Normally, they fizzle out pretty quick. It's the non-conscious manifestations that are stronger and that are able to feed upon energies to stay strong and to cause issues.
And do you do these investigations by yourself, or do you have like a team of people, or?
I do most of them myself now.
Mhm.
I do them remotely for the most part. Well, I do some location investigations locally. It's interesting. Like I said, I don't live far from Gettysburg. And when I moved up here in May of 2016, I started seeing, and people were telling me, I started seeing an increase of hauntings. And I have been involved with 21 local cases since that time, which is, I think, is kind of high for this area. I mean, who knows what's not even being reported?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So I don't live in a large town. I live in an area that, well, I guess overall it's probably 15 to 25,000 people.
Hmm.
It's got a town plus townships around it, but it does seem like it's a lot. It does seem like it's a lot.
I wonder why that is.
I don't know. It's an area that's had a lot of bizarre history. Not only with the battle before Gettysburg, there was a battle here in this town, but it was kind of a rogue's nest in colonial times for a lot of highwaymen and robbers and stuff that used to come out of the cities, either Philadelphia or Baltimore, and kind of ended up here.
Do you find that a lot of people reach out to you sort of hesitantly, like they don't want to come off sounding crazy, or they're a little ashamed because I don't know, because this stuff isn't just socially accepted by most people?
It's not as bad as it used to be. I guess people are more in depth to it now because of, it's on TV. There's
Yeah,
a lot
sure.
of different things, yeah, they're not as squeamish about it, or they don't try to conceal it as much as they used to. And, I tell them, look, the bottom line is you got to have an open mind when I do this. You got to be cooperative. And if I don't feel that what you're telling me or what you're experiencing needs attention, I just won't do it. You do a lot of people that think they've got something and just don't have anything at all.
Like they're reading into it a little bit.
Yeah, it does happen.
Sure. There's probably a lot of people who, especially since it's sort of in the mainstream in a lot of ways, who want an experience like that. So they're seeing things that aren't really actually that.
Yeah, some people have real vivid imaginations, and I'll be quite honest with you, a lot of people that do have vivid dreams, and I've always had vivid dreams. They kind of take it to their waking time as well. So you do hear a lot of different things. I do run across a lot of people that believe that there's all kind of different things that are causing problems with them. I will give them the benefit of the doubt, but as I go on, it becomes apparent that there's really nothing going on.
Do you get a lot of cases involving like alien encounters or abductions?
Yeah, I do. I have had some. I worked a large case for an individual by the name of David Eckhart, and down in Pensacola, Florida. That was a bizarre case. I actually thought from the very beginning, even though he had some photographic evidence, that this may have been a spirit type situation, because there were a lot of weird things that were turning up in the attic of the house, because the house was actually a new house. It was a house he had built. It was kind of bizarre. Then, I kept an open mind about David for maybe the first 3 or 4 months, but as time went on, and as he gathered evidence, and as I went through it, and it really became apparent that he was experiencing, him and his family as well, were experiencing abductions. And literally what was going on was there was a portal that would open up in the bedroom area. Wow. And they would just come in and literally take him and his family separately into another realm of some type. I believe for the most part, he was taken to 2 different locations. One was underground on Earth. Another was under the sea on Earth. And I do believe there's a possibility he may have been taken on a craft at one point, though I'm really not positive about that.
And these went on for some time, right?
Yeah, it went on for approximately 10 years, and he is still visited occasionally. This situation is very interesting because before I was even allowed to get deeper into the investigation, they had to clear me. Mm-hmm. In other words, they had to actually come to me. I had one experience basically where these things came and kind of stood over me while I was sleeping and watching me.
The aliens did.
And I didn't say anything about it. And David told me, he asked me, he said, you've been cleared to go ahead and publish the evidence I'm giving you. They did come to you. And he explained everything that happened. And I never said anything to him. So I knew then that something was definitely going on. And in fact, he did an episode of Fact and Fiction, Paranormal Files, several years ago, and they couldn't debunk any of it. And in fact, there were some strange things that happened that really didn't get out into the show, though it did mention. There was one in particular. David used to tell me that when he would get these entities would come through, that earthworms in the area in his yard and backyard mm-hmm. would come to the surface. And he said the morning after these encounters, he would literally have to go out with the garden hose and clean these things off his driveway and on his sidewalk out into the street. There were so many of them.
Crazy. What Why? Why did that happen?
because it was either the energy that they were using somehow to get into the house was causing these things to rise up out of the earth. And it
Crazy.
did happen to the Fact and Fiction, the Paranormal File show. It did happen to them. They did show a group of worms coming out in the yard.
Wow.
So his
Crazy.
neighbors used to get a little peeved off at him because they just couldn't understand how all these earthworms are ended up on the street. He was washing them out of the street in the morning.
Were his neighbors privy to what was going on with the family?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I never really heard anything from the neighbors. He tried to keep it as quiet as possible. I didn't give out the actual location of the house, but it did get to the point where they eventually moved. So they did follow him.
So yeah, because you said that they still check up on them, right?
Oh yeah.
So what
Yeah,
kind
it
of?
seems like every April and every November there is an encounter.
Mm-hmm. So would he experience missing time, or was he like aware when they would take him, and what would happen when they would take him?
You know, he was aware of everything. He was, when this first started to happen, David had crippling arthritis, and they basically cured him. I mean, I've seen the x-rays and everything. I mean, the man was very, very ill. They cured him of that, and for some reason, they would take him, and they wouldn't do any experimentation or anything on him, but they basically kind of gave him tours of these locations.
What locations?
The underground, the underwater, and this possible area that may have been in a craft. He wasn't sure what it was, but he did observe human experimentation. He observed humans used as slaves, as labor, as well as other entities, other extraterrestrials per se.
Wow.
And they would actually be at home some days, and these small entities, which were similar to grays, would actually come through the house and walk by. They kind of gave tours to other entities of the house. They were fascinated on how humans lived.
Crazy.
It was absolutely unbelievable.
Wow.
And there is a lot that I have never disclosed about this whole thing. I have threatened to write a book a couple of times, but I just, it just gets to the point where it just seems so bizarre. I mean, there are stories out there of other strange things, but I'll be honest with you, some of the things that have been described to me, I just don't really know how to put them out there or to disclose them where people wouldn't think I was absolutely crazy.
It must be some pretty outlandish stuff.
It's some strange things. Now David was very good at photographing and videotaping these entities. When he used to use a camcorder, but he would have the camcorder directly facing out to the areas where they would show up, and they kept busting his camcorders. And he started to believe that when, they could detect this thing filming them. So what he did, he bought a big, one of those corner security mirrors they put in stores. He put that in his bedroom, up in the corner of his bedroom, and aimed the camcorder to that.
Very smart.
And they weren't busting any more camcorders. He got a smoke machine. These entities would manifest cloaked at some points. They kind of go in and out. He actually turned on his smoke machine one night, and the outlines of these things were picked up on film.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the smoke machine was to sort of allow him to see the forms that were usually invisible.
Yeah.
Interesting. Did he documented that too?
Yeah, I have the photographs. I have published a few of them, but there are a lot of them. I mean, there are a lot of really bizarre incidents. I had one video where I actually saw a hand and an arm of one of these entities coming out of the wall. So, it's stuff like that. He's got a great memory. And, of course, he's into construction. So he does a lot of stuff by remembering certain things. And he drew diagrams about some of this equipment that he saw at some of these locations. Really bizarre stuff.
So did they experiment on any of his family?
No.
Okay.
No, from what I understand, that never happened. When they, it was his son, his daughter, and his wife. And from what I understand from David, now he never really got into specifics with them. He tried to shield them from a lot of this, and which I can understand.
Yeah, sure.
Though it did happen that his daughter got married and moved to Houston, and she and her husband have had several encounters as well there. You hear these theories about generational abductions, encounters, and I do believe it, because I tell you, I have read, heard, and documented a lot of these cases where different generations of families do experience very similar type of phenomena like that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that too. Have you had any firsthand encounters with?
I've had two.
Yeah,
I've had two. I've had two actual encounters with beings at home, tall grays. There were three of them in both times. This was around the time my wife, when she was sick and when she passed, I received, these things came to me for whatever reason. I also had I guess what you would call like a waking dream, where I experienced some type of abduction and was on a craft of some type heading towards the moon. It was so vivid. I tell you, it was so vivid that it shook me up. So I know it wasn't a dream. I know it wasn't something that, I imagined. I don't know what the situation was, but it seemed when I was getting to the point where I was coming close to the moon, and there was a craft there that I could barely see it. I either woke up or snapped out of it.
Or they wiped you.
Yeah, I think that's what may be what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Did it ever feel like they were, malevolent, or they were?
No, I never got that sense of any of that. I did have and I still do. It's kind of faded out, but I had a scoop mark on my belly, an actual scoop mark. It was strange because the mark was there. It didn't look like it was. It had just happened. It looked healed, but it was there. I don't know where that came from. I still don't know where that came from or when that happened.
You don't remember any?
No, I don't remember any of that.
Experimentation or anything like that?
No.
Interesting. So you have lots of books out that you've written about your experiences and your adventures and your exploits. And the latest one that came out, maybe 7 months ago, something like that?
Yeah, December.
Yeah, Mothman Dynasty, Chicago's Winged Humanoids. Tell us what for those people that haven't heard about the Owl Man of Chicago, maybe fill us in a little bit.
Well, back in March of actually it started April that we got the first report. April 2017, there was a report on MUFON out of Chicago of a woman who had an encounter in the area of Oz Park. She was an attorney. She was taking her dog for a walk, and they encountered this dark being standing in the playground area, and she didn't know quite what she was looking at. The dog actually got scared and cowered behind her. And as they stood there looking at this thing, it turned, and these red eyes appeared. She stated the thing was about 7 foot high. That it had wings behind it that actually were long enough that it extended above its head. She said the wings looked like that of, I think she told an investigator, we were able to get to talk to her eventually after we did some inquiry. But the wings were like that, and she said it looked like a Mothman. It looked like moth wings, butterfly wings. It was kind of bizarre. So she said this thing just shot up in the air, unfurled its wings as it shot up in the air. It came to an apex and let out a scream and then took off. So that was the first encounter that we had heard of. There were two other encounters that were on the MUFON CMS that we looked into. These were very similar, but they were described as owl-like, an owl man with owl wings, red eyes. The one individual called it Lacusa, which is a being that is well known or legendary in the Rio Grande area of Mexico, in southern Texas, to be like an owl man like being.
Mm-hmm.
So we took all these and started looking into them as best we could. Since they came on the MUFON CMS, we couldn't get much information. MUFON wasn't being any help. So I started advertising and started posting on Chicago bulletin boards and such, and every place I could, be honest with you, and about what has been going on, what people are seeing, and to contact me if anything comes up. And I was hoping we weren't going to get a bunch of crazies calling us, but it was interesting. When we started getting reports in, and they were coming from all around the area, even up into northwest Indiana. But the one thing that we did find that being credible to the witnesses were they were very adamant about what they saw, and they did embellish. When you would talk to them by phone and eventually in person, when you would talk to them, they would tell you what they saw, and when you start making suggestions, they wouldn't change. And that's unusual. That's very unusual. Not all of them had red eyes. For the majority, after the third and fourth sighting, the wing structures were that of a gargoyle or a bat. The average size was anywhere from 5 to 7 foot in height. Many had red eyes. The wings had a wingspan on the average of 10 to 12 foot. Mm-hmm. It seemed to be able to propel without the wings, just like a rocket going off, and it could hover as well.
Without flapping its wings.
Without flapping its wings.
That is odd.
So by the time I wrote the book, well, I actually started writing in August. And I was adding new sightings as they were coming into the book. And by the time we had an actual encounter in Piotrowski Park in Little Mexico, which is the Little Village area. And we had 7 sightings in Little Village, which is a high Hispanic area as well. By that time, we had over 50 sightings in Chicago. And the sightings and the encounters have actually spread out into southern Wisconsin. We had one very credible report in Milwaukee. So at this point now, we're up over 73 sightings, maybe a little more than that.
So they're still coming in, the reports?
Occasionally. Now, the reports of these entities weren't limited to Chicago. We had 3 reports in the area of Zephyrhills, Florida, and Pasco County around the same time. Very similar reports, very similar beings. We had a real interesting report just east of Cleveland where a delivery truck had actually hit one of these things.
Really?
And he described the incident where this thing hit the back. You know how the box on the back of the truck was extended above the cab, so it hit that and rolled off. He stopped the truck, got out. This thing was laying on the ground. Got up, looked at him with these red eyes, and took off.
Wow.
He stopped at the nearest station. Now, this was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and there were no dents on the truck, but from all the bugs and dirt that were on there, he could see an outline of this thing. So something definitely hit the truck.
Did it leave any blood, any DNA on it?
No blood, nothing like that.
Wow. That is Crazy. I mean, especially the sightings in Chicago, right? Because those sightings usually sort of occur in more rural places, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is, other than the Point Pleasant group of sightings back in 66 and 67,
The Mothman.
yeah, the Mothman sightings, this is the only other group like this. And
Huh.
that was in a small town. But as far as being in an urban area like Chicago and the environs of Chicago, yeah, that's distinctive. So, during that period, I was receiving literally 2 dozen or more calls a day between
Wow.
July and August of people that were scared that these sightings were a harbinger of something going to happen in Chicago.
Like the
And
Mothman.
I didn't perpetuate that. I tried to get people off of that. I told them, I said, I have no idea why they're there, what they are. I'm not going to speculate. And
Sure.
as well, we've also had several police officers that were witnesses as well. So, we didn't get any help from the city at all. As far as video from security companies or from businesses or even from the city, we did not get any cooperation whatsoever. And in fact, there was one of the witnesses worked at City Hall, and she told us that there is an effort to keep this situation quiet in Chicago.
I wonder why that is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. She believed it may have something to do with tourist, but tourism in Chicago. But I don't know.
I would
I
think that
don't know what the reason was behind that.
I mean, that's the kind of thing I would go to a city to see.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't quite understand why that happened, but they were not cooperative at all. We tried to get our investigators to get permission to go to certain areas that were owned by the city, and it just didn't happen.
Strange. Did any documentation pour in from the people that actually were involved in the sightings?
We did get one photograph,
Hmm.
uh, very indiscernible.
So what?
These sightings were so fleeting. This thing was quick.
Sure,
By
sure.
the time they got the phone out and got it going to take a picture, the thing was gone.
Yeah.
Uh, Many were at night, so it was hard to get a photograph from that. We did get several sketches, and I say we talked to, I'd say 70-80% of the witnesses. And I'll be honest with you, these witnesses saw something or encountered something. Uh, some of the witnesses in the little village area were very close to this thing, and this thing actually reacted to them. So there were a lot of scared people in that neighborhood.
Sure. And maybe that lent, I mean, you were talking about like people thinking it's a harbinger for something bad happening. I think when you encounter something so otherworldly, your fear just sort of kicks in and you think you immediately leap to the worst case scenario or something, like it's the end of the world is coming or something like that.
Well, the story of the Mothman and the Silver Bridge collapse and such got out.
Hmm. Yeah.
A lot of people knew about that, but there were a lot of rumors about that circulating, and that it was a harbinger of some type. And some of
Hmm.
the other claims later on of different disasters that were associated with the Mothman or a winged being. So people were scared. People were upset. They wanted to know what was going on.
Yeah, sure.
So, I kind of expected that was going to happen, but, the media really did not delve into this like I thought they may, though in a way I'm kind of glad they didn't, because I didn't need it getting out and then getting a whole bunch of copycat
Hmm.
sightings.
Sure.
I wanted, I was kind of happy the way it turned out because we were getting credible sightings. Frankly, I out of the sighting reports that we did get, I only dismissed maybe 3 or 4,
Hmm.
which I thought were just too incredible or
Um,
just didn't have enough evidence for me to even pursue. But the sightings themselves were they were scattered. I mean, the most part, most of the sightings were in areas near the lake, downtown, or in other areas up and down the lakeshore. So we're not sure if the lake had any reason for why these things showed up. The fact that there were other sightings in locations out of the city into the suburbs. I don't believe it was one being. I believe there was at least three, if not more, just by some of the characteristics, locations, and the groupings. I truly believe it.
And so you think that these were flesh and blood entities, right?
I personally believe they're flesh and blood, but they were able to come into our earth plane through a portal of some type. How? Who knows? I mean, we did have one sighting where these two other ladies did this thing, not too far from Wrigley Park, to be honest, and they saw this thing flying over a street intersection and just suddenly disappeared like it went through a door.
Interesting.
So, that happened after I started theorizing that this may be some type of maybe interdimensional or some type of portal or traveler, some type. I mean, we have a lot of, even in the group, we have a lot of different theories. That's why I put everybody that was in our investigation group, I allowed each one of them to make a statement to publish in the book and what they thought it was. There were like, if you read the book, towards the end of the book, there's everybody's different theory is in there.
Were there any kind of other phenomena that happened at the same time that would lead you to believe that they were linked?
That's another strange thing. Normally when you get something of this magnitude, even Bigfoot sightings, you may see orbs and UFOs or some other paranormal phenomena or anomalies going on. In these sightings, we didn't have that. Chicago has always been a high sighting area for UFO activity.
Really?
Oh yeah, Chicago's the area around Chicago has always had a lot of UFO activity, and for whatever reason, during the period that the majority of these sightings were going on, the UFO activity or the reports kind of swayed off some, so it waned.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't seem that and I kept an eye on the reports because I was looking for anomalies as well. There were some flashing light anomalies south of the city that were kind of unexplained. I don't know if this had anything to do with this phenomena. But other than that, there wasn't really anything that I could associate with what people were seeing.
And so since that time, the sightings have kind of tapered off and spread out a little bit?
Yeah, I think we've only had one sighting in the city of Chicago this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think there's only one. We've had several in southern Wisconsin. Altogether, I think as far as actual sightings in the southern Wisconsin, Illinois area, maybe 5 or 6.
Is that a typical sort of pattern for cryptid sightings?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. I guess.
I guess it depends on it depends on what's going on. I mean,
Sure.
like I'm here in Pennsylvania. We get, we have a lot of Bigfoot sightings, a lot of upright canine sightings, and they do seem to come in groups occasionally. The Bigfoot sightings in this state kind of go in and out. We get periods of a lot of them, and then they just taper off. We had an upright canine dogman sighting group back in 2014 through 15. We had 22 reliable sightings, and we occasionally will get one here and there, but nothing like that period.
And so, upright canine. What is that all about? It just looks like a dog walking on its two hind legs.
It just depends. I mean, you've heard of the Beast of Bray Road, something similar to that, but it's somewhat different.
Okay.
Those it's an act. For the most part, these things think about the underworld series with the lichens.
Okay.
I don't like that. Kind of your worst nightmare. They're tall, they're huge. They've got yellow eyes for the most part. They've got tapered bodies with a heavy chest, hocked legs, which they walk on. Arms that are muscular, look human, though they have claws. They have large feet that have claws. They have a wolf-like head with an extended snout that's a little bit larger than a wolf's. And the body has sparse hair, but the head has full hair. And I have heard of some that have gotten as tall as 10 foot. Some of the sightings, those are the sightings in Pennsylvania. Now, we also have other sightings of other canine type beasts. One is what I consider the dog man, or it's a quadruped that kind of looks like a hyena. It's got a wolf head and a hyena back, slope back, long tail. Very intelligent, very, very scary.
Any physical interactions with these things?
There have been very close encounters. I have actually talked to hunters who were armed that were so afraid that they wouldn't even take a shot at it. Yeah, these things were that frightening.
Wow. Any documentation at all?
No, to be honest with you, we just really haven't gotten much as far as documentation, and that kind of lends to the theory these things may be more supernatural than actual flesh and blood. We've had some sightings that just seemed to be very supernatural. And in other words, we had one where these two gentlemen were coming back from they were musicians, and they were in their van. They were driving back about 2:00 in the morning. They saw this thing on the side of the road, crouched down eating roadkill. But they said it had like a sheen to it, like there was a misty sheen to it. Really bizarre.
Have you ever had any encounters or people calling in with reports of shapeshifters or skinwalkers?
I've talked to a lot of people who have say they experienced skinwalker. These are mostly Navajo and Apache witnesses from in the Four Corners area and around there. The skinwalker phenomena, if you go to the real lore of it, it's Native American or Native witch that has the ability to shapeshift. We have received reports that would kind of lend to that description, but it's just hard to imagine that was what it was. We had a series of reports in Cambria County, Pennsylvania, South Central Pennsylvania, where these it was an area around a reservoir. Now, these are sightings we got this year of a white wolf-like biped, and we also got sightings in the same area of a white humanoid being. So, is it the same thing? I don't know. I mean, we got 4 sightings of that.
Interesting. And it was just like, people seeing them from afar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I'll ask you about a couple of more cases that I saw on the website, but I didn't see any descriptions of, and then I'll let you go on with your evening. There was something mentioned about a Western Pennsylvania werewolf. What was that about?
Yeah, that's a work in progress. The individual involved with that got scared. There's a lot of factors behind that. They're college kids. They say they witnessed one of their friends actually manifest into a werewolf-like creature. The documentation the story behind it kind of goes back into antiquity. And there's a German connection to it. There's a connection to an individual who used to live in the area in the late 1800s, who was thought to have been a werewolf, and that was killed by a hatchet. The lore, it's actually there. I mean, I've seen the documents. And but the witnesses are very apprehensive about continuing. The one individual's mother is a well-known doctor in the area, researcher actually, and they don't want to go too much further into because they're afraid it's going to affect her. So it's something I'm keeping the door open on. We are all ready to go out there and do the investigation. There does seem to be some implements, and that's what I'll call them right now, implements associated with this phenomenon. That kind of goes into the lore of the werewolf, and this is lore that from the old country and some of the implements that were found and associated with these beings. So I've got photographs of it. I don't know how authentic it is, but at this point we're going to keep the door open.
Sure. What do you mean by implements?
Well, there is one story about a certain individual, well-known individual back in Europe, who could transform into a werewolf-like being when they wore a belt that was made of werewolf fur. And this belt, I've seen pictures of it. It looks authentic, and the documentation that was found with it looks authentic. So it's one of these things that I'm not. I kind of implied a few things when I wrote about it, but I didn't really want to put it out there and be very descriptive. I probably told more to you than I probably told anybody else. But that's the point where we are right now. It's just a matter of us taking the team out there and actually investigating, get some boots on the ground, and see what we can come up with.
Wouldn't they be willing to proceed with the investigation if it was, if their names weren't disclosed, or is it already too much past that point?
I think they would, but I think the individual who actually did the transformation, we had been in contact with, he's afraid. He just doesn't want to talk about it anymore. He does genuinely seem concerned about saying too much. The two witnesses, they were all for it, but it came to a point where they didn't want to go too much further into it because of his mother and some other things that were associated with it. These are kids that are away at college a lot of the year, and I'll probably have to wait until they come back for the summer next year till I can really get back into this, or when they contact me. I have tried to contact the main witness several times since the initial report, and it's just been futile.
And did this person change intentionally? Like, was he showing these other people that he could change, or did it just?
No, they were actually. He thought he was not, not followed, or that anybody was watching him, and they swear this guy turned into something that they just couldn't imagine.
Wow.
I mean, they didn't say it was, actual werewolf like you see on TV, but he definitely changed into something.
Crazy. Let's see. There's one more. I'm not sure how to pronounce it right. Conewago Phantom?
Conewago Phantom.
Conewago, yeah. What's that all about?
That was my encounter. That was back in 1988. I was actually running across a friend of mine who was a scoutmaster. And we had been scouts together when we were kids. So he knew I was into paranormal and such, but he just came up and we were talking. And he said, there's a situation. There have been some situations at the old Camp Conewago where some of these scout troops have been literally run out of the woods, been scared, and left their campsites early because of these awful screams they've been hearing in the woods. So, I thought, well, I don't know, it could have been an owl or something like that. I don't know what it was. So he asked me, so, if we go up there next weekend, could you come along? So I said, sure, so we went up, I came up there and met them up there and decided to stay the weekend. So we went ahead and walked into the woods, into the area where these, these scouts had camped at. And, I'll make a long story short, when we got there, I had this weird feeling when we started there. The first night was pretty quiet, though. We all had separate tents, and we did hear something moving about at night. We didn't know what it was. Nobody went out and looked. I was tired anyway, so I thought maybe somebody was up relieving themselves or something. So I didn't know what it was. But anyway, we talked about it the next morning. So that next day, it was a really nice day. We went out and started roaming the woods. And we were out walking for at least 7 hours that day. I don't know how many miles we covered, but, I didn't see anything unusual. It's a really thick area, though. Thick woods, a lot of wildlife. So I said, something might have scared these kids that they just didn't know what it was. So, it might have been some animal that just kind of spooked them. So anyway, we that night, we were actually sitting around a campfire talking about football. And it was about 11 o'clock. I'd say it was about 11 o'clock. Bright night, too. Moon was out. We heard these screams, and it kind of came in and out. And it literally sounded like a child screaming. And, I've heard a lot of things scream in my time, and, a lot of owls or eagles, hawks.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't sound anything like that. I don't know what it was. So we sat there, and I said, well, if it happens again, maybe we can go out a little bit. So I got up and started walking around. And I tell you, I literally felt like something was watching me. So when I came back and sat down and we were talking, I was talking to this guy, telling him, I kind of got a strange feeling. I don't know what it is, but I just got this weird feeling something watching us. So I suggest, well, let's go ahead and walk up the trail, which the trail is right along the creek. And so we got our flashlights out and started walking up the trail towards the fork in the creek. And, we weren't more than 50 foot away from the campsite. And suddenly we saw this thing standing in the creek. The creek was really low at that time. And this dark figure, probably about 6 foot tall, and these red eyes just looking at us in the night.
Wow.
I mean, the moonlight was enough that we could tell the form. We could tell there was something on its back. We could see the structures on its back. By the time we got the flashlight on this thing, it was gone. It whooshed just straight up in the air. And a couple seconds after that, we heard it screech. And we heard it fly off as it faded away. Well, we got back to the campsite. One of the guys, he was shook. I mean, he wasn't talking at all. And the other guy and I talked. He said, "Did you see those things in the back?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know what they were." He said, "I think they may have been wings." I said, "Okay." So I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know what that could have been. So anyway, he and the other guy, they went up to the administration building and spent the night up there. I wanted to see what this thing was.
Yeah, sure.
So I stayed at the campsite, but nothing happened the rest of the night. So, after this happened, I filed a report for myself and, kept everything written down. So now this was 88. After I started the blog in 2005, I put this story up, this encounter up around 2007, 2008. So this is almost 20 years later. So when I put it up on my blog, I got a comment from an individual who said, I've been hearing that scream. He lives near an area called Dick's Dam, which is just downstream upstream about a mile away from where we were. He said, I've been hearing these screamings for years and had no idea what it was. He said, when I read your account, it's the first time I ever heard it. I said, okay. So, that was interesting. Then about a week later, I got another letter from a scout leader who told me, he said, I was up at Camp Conawaga about a month ago with my boys, and we were camping in around the same area where we were, and they came running towards the campsite, screaming, yelling, said they saw a dragon on the trail. So he thought they were pulling his leg, you know. So they described this thing as looking like a dragon, but it had feathers and a tail. And it was about 6 foot tall. And I'm thinking, you know, he said, I don't know what they were trying to do. He said, I just think they were trying to play games, but they were serious. He said, now, after I've read what happened to you, he said, you know, I think they may have been telling me the truth. So I haven't received any other sightings in the camp area since then. But up and along the Conawaga Creek, from Camp Conawaga downstream to where it empties into the Susquehanna, which is approximately 20 miles or so, I've received 5 reports since then of this thing being seen by the creek. And they're all very similar. It kind of is like the Mothman. So that's what I called the Conawaga Phantom.
Yeah.
Now, people around there are calling it old red eye. That's what they call it now. I don't know. You know, that's kind of, I guess I'm kind of into the lore now.
Yeah, exactly. You weren't scared at all to stay out there by yourself waiting.
I wanted to see what it was. I mean, sure. You know, that period of time, it was no problem me staying in the woods. I mean, you know,
sure.
I used to camp out. I used to sneak on the Gettysburg battlefield and used to sleep there at nighttime sometimes.
Wow.
You know, it didn't scare me.
Your curiosity outweighed any.
Oh yeah, I wanted to see what it was.
Yeah, good for you. That's what's driven you this whole time. You want to see what it is.
Yep, it is.
That's great. Well, Lon, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for taking time to do this for me. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
And you want to tell the listeners where they can find you or where they can get a hold of you if they have sightings or anything that they want investigated?
Yeah, the website is phantomsandmonsters.com, and you can contact me by sending an email at lonstrickler@phantomsandmonsters.com. There are banners or buttons for you to click on the website, the blog, to contact me, or you can call me at 410-241-5974, and I'll take your report. And I've got 6 books on Amazon, and the last one was the one you mentioned, Mothman Dynasty, Chicago's Winged Humanoids. And we are in the process, the book rights were sold to that. So
cool.
We're in the process of possibly having a film or documentary made. And there are a few other things coming down the road. We are
nice.
My team and I are going to be seen by everybody eventually. We don't know.
That's great.
You know, everything like that's up in the air.
That's fantastic. I make documentaries too, man. So if you ever need somebody to edit or shoot or anything like that, I'd be more than willing to lend a hand.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Lon. And I'd love to have you on again sometime. And have a good rest of your evening.
You too. Take care.
Well, all right. That was a fun conversation. Lon is a good guy. It's you know, when somebody is willing to go out there and examine stuff firsthand instead of just being a collector of stories, I'm always inspired by that. Absolutely. And to sort of make that your life's calling is pretty courageous, especially within a cultural context that, you know, at the office, we will profess to think that such things are just, you know, crazy. The stuff of a deluded mind. But, you know, behind closed doors, I think more of us probably believe in the possibility of creatures like that than many would be willing to admit. I would reckon, at least. I admit it. I mean, I have an open mind. That is where this podcast operates from, is having an open mind. I don't feel like I have to draw the episode into some sort of conclusionary place. I think it's all right just to leave all of that stuff dangling in midair And you all talk about it. I'm not here to draw any conclusions for anybody, nor do I wish to. Because much of this stuff, because I am open-minded, doesn't necessarily mean that I believe every speck of it or believe it all to the same degree. So I try and leave the door open, and I think that is a much more realistic approach to life than only letting certain things in that we can truly measure and quantify and corner, in a sense, into submission, because we've weighed it, we've seen it, we've magnified it, we've measured it. Therefore, it exists. Like, I don't think that can encompass everything, and I'm fine with free flying in the air, not knowing if something exists or doesn't. Like, I like to play around with the idea of that stuff. I think it's important. It keeps your imagination fluid instead of calcified. I would also like to apologize for the sound quality of this episode, because it was the first interview that I recorded for this podcast, The Melt. And so I really kind of was just getting the hang of it. I was just kind of feeling my way through the dark. And not only did it not sound great even before what I'm about to describe happened, but it sounded worse afterwards. So I recorded the interview, didn't really know what I was doing, tried my best to sort of clean it up afterwards or start to edit it. But before I started to do all that, I uploaded a version onto YouTube just so I could send the link to a couple of people and, get their ideas about the interview and how it went. So then my laptop crashes, and the interview is gone with that. But I do have the version that's on YouTube, so I downloaded that. Sounded cruddy. The audio tracks weren't broken up into different channels, so I kind of had to equalize everything in the same fell swoop, and it was just not ideal. So my apologies for that. I see that improving as time goes on. And if you like this or the first episode of The Melt, there's only been 2 so far, and I think we're off to a great start. Feel free to support, donate, subscribe, however you want to put it. Just go to www.patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and there you will find many, many ways that you can help out. Anything from $1 up. It's totally up to you. I don't want to have a price set, at least at this point, where some of the information is behind that. I don't want money to stop people from knowing stuff. I understand it's great incentive, and I don't disrespect anybody for doing it. I understand why people do it, but I don't feel good about doing that, at least at this point. If I stumble upon some great justification that makes sense to me, then I will do that. But I would rather leave it open-ended. I want you to donate and help support this podcast because you're good people. Because I'm, scraping and scrounging, trying to get this thing together, and I want to make it the best thing that I possibly can. So I would really like to broaden the scope of this podcast and take it places, literally travel with it, interview people at conventions, and spend the night in haunted houses, and go to the place in Britain where all the crop circles are concentrated, stuff like that. But that takes money, and my pockets are pretty shallow right now. So any little bit that you could help, and Patreon is great because it will take that amount out of your bank account monthly, or you can do a one-time donation. So either of those things would be a huge help. And you can find this podcast at themeltpodcast.com. It is not really the website that it's going to be in the future. At this point, that's still under construction. But in the meantime, you can always find it on my Facebook page, The Melt Podcast, or you can find it on iTunes, where you can subscribe to it, and it will come to you as the episodes are released. I'm not sure with what frequency that's going to happen, but we'll see. I'm playing it by ear. You can reach me at themeltpodcast@gmail.com. And that's also where you can send your stories of your experiences with everything that falls out of the spectrum of consensus reality, whether that be a drug experience, whether that be a spiritual experience, whether that be a UFO experience, whatever, anything, any experience that falls out of the confines of what we're supposed to see as reality. I want to hear about it and potentially share it on this podcast. So always looking forward to those. All right. I think that brings us to the close. Until next time.